The sun had barely risen over the small settlement when an unusual tension hung in the air. Birds chirped as if trying to ignore the heavy silence. But the people on the dusty streets moved uneasily, whispering to one another. Something had happened, something terrible, and everyone seemed to feel its weight. The village had always been a quiet place, where people went about their daily lives without fear. Farmers tended to their fields. Children played near the river, and traders carried baskets of fruits and grains to the small market. But today, the sense of calm was shattered. Rumors were spreading like wildfire, and those who had seen or heard something knew that the community's peace was in grave danger. At the center of all this was the chief, a man known far and wide for his wisdom and fairness. He was not just a leader by title, he was a father figure to his people, a protector who had spent decades ensuring that conflicts were resolved peacefully. His voice had guided countless disputes, and his judgment had prevented bloodshed many times before. People trusted him, and his presence alone had a calming effect. But now, the same man who had once been the heart of the village was surrounded by soldiers, bound in heavy chains, and accused of a crime he did not commit. The accusation was shocking. A violent crime had occurred near the settlement. Someone had attacked a family, leaving one person badly hurt. Fear and anger spread quickly. People demanded justice, and the authorities, eager to show that they were in control, acted hastily. They needed someone to blame, and in their eyes, the chief became the target. Perhaps it was because of old tensions between different groups in the region, or perhaps it was the easiest way to calm the frightened townspeople. Whatever the reason, no one bothered to investigate thoroughly. The chief, the man who had lived a life dedicated to peace, was now labeled a criminal in front of everyone. When the soldiers arrived at his home, they did so with force. The chief did not resist. He had always believed in honesty and truth, and he knew that fighting back would only make the situation worse. His calm demeanor, however, did not prevent the whispers of fear and anger from spreading among the people who watched. Women clutched their children, elders shook their heads in disbelief, and young men stared silently, unsure of what to do. The chief's family tried to speak on his behalf, but their words were drowned out by the loud commands of the soldiers. Among those present was a young translator named Samuel. He had been assigned to the settlement to help bridge communication between the local people and the authorities. Samuel had known the chief for years, and he had always admired his wisdom and kindness. He could see the injustice of the situation immediately. As he listened to the accusations being shouted at the chief, he noticed the chief's expressions, the subtle movements of his hands, the calmness in his voice. Despite the tension around him, Samuel had seen fear in the eyes of many people before, but not in the chief's. There was a quiet confidence, a dignity that spoke louder than words, and Samuel realized that something was terribly wrong. The soldiers did not care about understanding the chief's side of the story. They were focused on carrying out orders, and the crowd, caught in a mixture of fear and anger, barely noticed the injustice unfolding before them. The chief was led through the streets, chains clinking with every step, and the villagers were forced to watch. It was a humiliating and frightening sight. Yet the chief remained composed. He walked with his head held high, acknowledging the fearful glances of his people with a small nod or a gentle look. It was clear that he did not blame them. He understood that fear could make people see the wrong person as guilty. Samuel followed closely, translating the commands and questions for the chief when required. As he did, he began to notice inconsistencies in the way the soldiers and officials were reporting events. The story they told was full of gaps and contradictions, yet no one seemed to question it. The chief, in contrast, spoke honestly and with clarity, recounting events as they had happened, and providing details that only someone who had been truly present could know. Samuel felt a growing unease. He knew that if he stayed silent, an innocent man would face consequences for a crime he had not committed. But speaking up was dangerous. The authorities did not tolerate dissent, and Samuel's position as a translator depended on obedience. Despite the fear, Samuel's conscience would not allow him to ignore the truth. He remembered the many times the chief had helped him and others in the village, guiding them through conflicts and teaching them the value of honesty and justice. The chief had never asked for recognition or reward. His actions had always been selfless. Seeing him now, bound in chains and accused falsely, Samuel felt a surge of determination. He knew that if anyone could stop this injustice, it would have to be someone willing to pay a personal price. As they approached the central square, the tension grew even stronger. The authorities had chosen this location deliberately. It was where the villagers gathered for announcements, disputes, and celebrations. Now, it would be the site of a trial, or what the officials called a trial intended more for spectacle than justice. People crowded around, some out of curiosity, others out of fear, and a few out of hope that truth might somehow prevail. Samuel could hear murmurs of disbelief and whispered prayers. Many villagers knew the chief well. They had seen him act with honesty and courage countless times. Yet the fear of the unknown crime made some hesitant to speak out. The chief was placed on a raised platform, chains binding his wrists and ankles. His posture remained dignified, his eyes scanning the crowd with a calm awareness. He did not shout, he did not plead. Instead, he waited, trusting that the truth would eventually come to light. Samuel, standing nearby, translated his words carefully, choosing each sentence with care. He tried to convey the chief's sincerity and the clarity of his statements, hoping that the authorities, or someone in the crowd, might notice the disparity between the chief's calm honesty and the chaotic accusations around him. Hours passed, and the tension did not ease. Officials debated among themselves. Villagers whispered anxiously, and the chief remained steadfast. Samuel continued to watch, noticing the subtle reactions of everyone involved. The fear, the doubt, the anger, and occasionally, the faint glimmer of hope. He realized that this was more than just a legal matter. It was a test of courage, integrity, and the power of truth. The chief's life depended not only on evidence, but also on the willingness of someone to recognize the injustice and act upon it. As evening approached, the sun casting long shadows across the square, Samuel felt the weight of responsibility pressing upon him. He knew that in the coming hours, decisions would be made that could alter the lives of many people. He thought of the chief's family, the villagers who trusted him, and the principle of justice that had always guided the settlement. Samuel understood that he could not remain silent, even if speaking out was dangerous. The fate of an innocent man rested in his hands, and he could not betray that trust. The night fell, bringing with it a quiet that contrasted sharply with the day's chaos. Fires flickered in the square, illuminating the anxious faces of the villagers. The chief sat calmly, chains glinting in the firelight, and Samuel felt a renewed determination. He knew that the coming hours would be critical, that every word and every action mattered. The chief's innocence was clear to those who knew him well, yet the authorities were blinded by fear and the desire for quick justice. It would take courage, careful observation, and unwavering honesty to prevent a grave injustice. Even in this dark moment, there was a sense of hope. The chief's dignity and calm presence inspired Samuel and some of the villagers, reminding them that truth and integrity could withstand fear and pressure. Samuel resolved to remain vigilant, to pay close attention to every word, gesture, and reaction, and to act when the moment was right. He knew that the path ahead would be dangerous and uncertain, but the alternative, allowing an innocent man to suffer, was unthinkable. And so, as the night deepened, the scene was set. An innocent chief chained for a crime he did not commit, a young translator determined to uncover the truth, and a village holding its collective breath, unsure of what the dawn would bring. This was the beginning of a story where courage, integrity, and careful observation would collide with fear, power, and injustice. The fate of many rested on the choices of a few, and the smallest voice, if brave enough, could change everything. The morning after the chief's arrest was heavy with tension, almost as if the air itself carried the weight of injustice. The villagers moved cautiously through the streets, some whispering in fear, others watching silently as soldiers patrolled every corner. The central square, where the chief had been displayed for public judgment, was already filling with people again. They had come to witness what was being called a trial, Though everyone knew that the outcome seemed predetermined, the chief remained in chains, seated on the raised platform as if he were a prisoner of fate. Yet there was something in his posture, a quiet, unwavering strength that made even the fearful villagers glance at him with admiration and hope. Samuel, the translator, had spent the night thinking about what he had seen and heard the day before. His mind kept replaying the chief's calm expressions, his thoughtful words, and the subtle dignity in the way he had faced the crowd and the authorities. Samuel could not shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The accusations leveled against the chief did not match the evidence, or at least, they did not match what Samuel knew about the chief's actions and character. He had translated statements carefully, noting the nuances, the pauses, the gestures. In every movement, every word, there was a truth that the authorities were blind to, and Samuel felt an almost physical need to act, even if he did not yet know how. As the morning progressed, the officials began their questioning. Their questions were sharp, loud, and designed to provoke fear or confession. "Where were you on the night of the attack?" one officer demanded, glaring at the chief. "Why did no one see you there?" Another shouted. "Admit your guilt. We have evidence against you." The chief responded calmly, speaking in measured tones. He described his actions during the time of the incident, naming the people he had spoken with, the places he had been, and even small details that only someone innocent and present could recall. Samuel listened carefully, translating every word. But as he did, he noticed a troubling pattern. Some officials were misrepresenting the chief's words, twisting them into something that sounded like guilt. A slight mispronunciation here, a sentence shortened there, it was enough to confuse those who did not know the full truth. Samuel's heart sank as he realized that the chief's honest answers were being manipulated to serve a false narrative. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on him. If he remained silent, the chief could be condemned by words that were not even his own. Samuel tried to maintain a careful balance. He continued translating accurately, choosing words that would convey the chief's sincerity. Yet he could see the officials becoming impatient. They were looking for a confession, something that would satisfy the angry crowd. Each moment that passed made the danger more real. The chief remained composed, but Samuel could sense a quiet tension in his eyes. He was aware of the stakes, and he was counting on someone to notice the truth before it was too late. As the questioning continued, Samuel began to notice inconsistencies in the official story. Witnesses who had supposedly seen the chief near the scene of the crime gave descriptions that did not match each other. Their timelines conflicted with known events, and some details were impossible given the chief's documented activities. Samuel wrote these observations down quietly in his notebook, realizing that the pieces of a puzzle were starting to fall into place. There was a real killer out there, someone who had planned this crime carefully, using fear and manipulation to frame an innocent man. The villagers watched in a mix of fear and disbelief. Some were too afraid to speak, fearing the wrath of the authorities if they contradicted the official story. Others whispered among themselves, pointing out facts they remembered, small details that seemed to support the chief's innocence. The tension was palpable. Samuel knew that if he could find a way to connect these details, he might be able to prevent the execution, but he also knew it would require careful planning and immense courage. The authorities had already shown that they valued control over justice, and challenging them could be dangerous. Samuel recalled conversations he had had with the chief in the past. The chief had always emphasized the importance of observation and careful listening. Truth is often hidden in what people do, not just in what they say, he had once told Samuel. Those words echoed in Samuel's mind now. He began to pay closer attention to the body language of the witnesses, the hesitation in their voices, the subtle signs of fear or guilt. It became increasingly clear that some people were hiding the truth, perhaps out of fear of reprisal, perhaps because they were complicit in the crime itself. One witness, a man who worked near the river where the attack had occurred, seemed nervous. His hands shook slightly, and he avoided direct eye contact with the chief. Samuel noted that the man's account did not align with what he had observed the day of the incident. Another witness, a woman who had claimed to see the chief nearby, contradicted herself multiple times. Her timeline was off, and she seemed unsure of key details. Samuel began connecting these contradictions in his mind, realizing that they formed a pattern pointing away from the chief and toward someone else entirely. As the hours passed, Samuel also began to notice the way the authorities were treating certain witnesses with favoritism. Some were allowed to speak freely, while others were pressured or ignored. It became clear that the officials had a vested interest in framing the chief, and that truth alone was not enough to sway them. Samuel understood that he could not rely solely on evidence. He would need to intervene personally, using his position as translator to make the inconsistencies clear. But how could he do so without putting himself at risk? The chief, ever calm, seemed to sense Samuel's growing concern. At one point, he leaned slightly toward him and said, "Observe carefully. Listen not just to what is said, but to what is not said. There is more truth hidden in silence than in loud accusations." Samuel nodded quietly. Understanding the weight of these words, he began to watch not just the official questioning, but the interactions between witnesses, the subtle shifts in posture, the fleeting expressions of guilt or fear. Each small detail added to a picture that contradicted the authorities' story. Samuel also remembered the chief's actions leading up to the crime. The chief had spent the day before the attack negotiating a peaceful solution between two rival groups. He had been seen by multiple villagers working to prevent conflict, not to cause it. Samuel compared these recollections with the official accounts, and realized that the narrative being presented was almost entirely fabricated. The chief's calmness, his attention to detail, and his consistent honesty all pointed to his innocence. Despite the growing clarity in Samuel's mind, fear remained. The officials were not open to alternative explanations, and the crowd was restless, eager for swift justice. Samuel realized that time was slipping away. Every minute that passed without intervention increased the risk that the chief would be condemned. He knew he had to act carefully, documenting the inconsistencies and preparing to speak up when the opportunity arose. As the day wore on, Samuel noticed that some villagers were beginning to whisper to one another, pointing out the gaps in the witnesses' stories and expressing doubt about the chief's guilt. Their courage gave him hope. Perhaps, he thought, there were others who recognized the injustice but were waiting for someone to give them a voice. Samuel resolved to become that voice, using his knowledge, his observations, and his position as translator to protect the chief and ensure that truth was heard. By late afternoon, the questioning had become more intense. The officials were growing impatient, pressing the chief for confessions that did not exist. Samuel continued to translate with care, conveying not just the words, but the calm sincerity with which they were spoken. He began to interject subtly when necessary, clarifying details that had been distorted or misunderstood. Each intervention carried risk, but he could see that it was beginning to make a difference. Some of the witnesses hesitated when confronted with contradictions, and the authorities started to notice that the chief's story did not align with their preconceived narrative. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the square, Samuel realized that the real challenge was just beginning. The chief's life depended not only on presenting evidence but on challenging the false story in a way that the authorities and the crowd could understand. Samuel understood that courage, precision, and timing would be crucial. He felt a mixture of fear and determination, knowing that the next steps would decide the fate of the chief and perhaps the village itself. Throughout it all, the chief remained calm, observing carefully, responding with clarity, and showing no anger toward those who had falsely accused him. His dignity and composure inspired Samuel and the villagers alike. They saw not only an innocent man facing danger but a leader whose integrity could not be shaken by fear or falsehood. Samuel resolved that he would not allow this man to be condemned unjustly. He would use every skill, every observation, and every ounce of courage to ensure that the truth was finally heard. And so, as night approached, the tension in the settlement grew. The chief remained chained but unbroken. Samuel prepared to act, and the villagers held their breath, uncertain of what would happen next. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together. The inconsistencies were becoming clearer, and the story of an innocent man facing execution because of fear and misunderstanding was far from over. The next day would bring new challenges, but Samuel's resolve was firm. He would not remain silent while injustice threatened the life of a man who had spent his life protecting others. The dawn of the third day brought with it a strange mixture of hope and fear. The villagers, still shaken by the events of the past 2 days, gathered cautiously around the central square. Whispers moved quickly from person to person as everyone tried to make sense of what had happened. Many were frightened, worried that any misstep could bring punishment or further chaos. Others were quietly hopeful, encouraged by the chief's calm demeanor and the subtle courage shown by the young translator, Samuel. The square was quiet at first, almost eerily so, as if the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for something momentous to unfold. Samuel spent the early hours observing everything carefully. The chief, still chained, sat on the raised platform with a calm and dignified air. He made no sudden movements, no loud complaints, only the occasional subtle nod or glance at the villagers, acknowledging them silently. Samuel could see the tension etched on the faces of the officials, who were growing increasingly impatient with the slow progress of what they called the investigation. Their frustration was palpable, and Samuel realized that any mistake could provoke harsh reactions, not only against the chief, but potentially against him as well. As the questioning began that morning, Samuel noticed that the witnesses who had been inconsistent the previous day were more nervous than ever. Their hands trembled slightly, their eyes darted around, and some even hesitated before answering. Samuel could sense that the pressure of the previous day had unsettled them, and he knew that if he acted wisely, he might be able to reveal the truth before it was too late. He recalled the chief's advice. Truth is in what people do, not just in what they say. That simple phrase guided him as he observed the subtle gestures, the fleeting glances, and the silent signals that hinted at guilt, fear, or dishonesty. The first breakthrough came unexpectedly. One witness, a young man who had been quiet and hesitant, finally spoke up. He hesitated at first, clearly afraid of the authorities, but then said something that contradicted the official story completely. Samuel's heart raced as he translated the words carefully, ensuring that every detail was communicated exactly as intended. The officials reacted quickly, trying to dismiss the testimony and pressure the young man into silence. But Samuel could see that this was the opportunity he had been waiting for. He stepped in subtly, clarifying the inconsistencies and pointing out details that the officials had ignored. The crowd began to murmur. Villagers exchanged glances, realizing that there were indeed cracks in the story that had been used to accuse the chief. Samuel could feel the tension in the square rising. The chief remained calm, observing everything with quiet intelligence. He did not speak out of turn, but his eyes seemed to encourage Samuel, silently acknowledging that he was on the right path. Samuel knew that the chief's trust in him carried a great responsibility. Every word he translated, every subtle clarification, could tip the balance between life and death. As the questioning continued, Samuel noticed that the officials were growing increasingly frustrated. They had assumed that the chief's chains and the public display of authority would intimidate him into confessing or at least faltering. Instead, the chief's calm demeanor and precise answers were unraveling their narrative. Samuel realized that the authorities were relying heavily on appearances, not facts, and this gave him an advantage. He began carefully highlighting contradictions in the witnesses' statements, pointing out timelines that did not match, and emphasizing the chief's actions that could be verified by multiple villagers. One key detail emerged that had the potential to change everything. Samuel remembered seeing a man near the river the night of the attack. A man who had behaved suspiciously and seemed to be watching the chief's movements. That man had been overlooked in the official investigation, dismissed as irrelevant. Samuel carefully described the man's appearance and behavior. Translating it into clear words for the officials, he could see the flicker of recognition in a few villagers' eyes. They remembered the same man and whispered to each other. The chief, though restrained, nodded subtly. This small breakthrough gave Samuel hope. He realized that if he could connect all the overlooked details, he might expose the real criminal. As the day wore on, Samuel faced a difficult challenge. He needed to speak with the witnesses in private to confirm the facts. But doing so openly could put him in danger. He began approaching them quietly, asking gentle questions, observing their reactions, and noting every inconsistency. Some were reluctant, fearing the authorities, while others were willing to speak once they saw Samuel's calm determination. Piece by piece, the puzzle started to form. The chief had not been near the scene of the crime. He had been working to prevent violence, not cause it. Someone else had taken advantage of the chaos, attempting to frame the chief for their own actions. The tension in the square grew as the officials realized that Samuel's careful translations were undermining their narrative. They tried to interrupt, to assert control, but Samuel remained composed. He knew that any sign of hesitation or fear could be exploited. He translated the chief's responses accurately and clearly, emphasizing details that proved his innocence. The chief, for his part, remained unshaken, speaking calmly and observing the subtle reactions of the crowd and witnesses. Every movement, every word, was a test of patience and courage. Around midday, a new piece of evidence came to light. A villager stepped forward with a story that directly contradicted the official accusations. This villager had been near the scene of the crime and had noticed someone acting suspiciously. Someone who matched the description Samuel had noted earlier. Samuel translated the account with care, ensuring that the details were precise and understandable. The officials reacted with surprise and frustration, but the villagers began murmuring with excitement. They could see that the chief's story was consistent and truthful, while the official narrative was crumbling under careful examination. As the day progressed, Samuel began to notice that the real criminal was growing increasingly anxious. The man who had orchestrated the crime tried to stay in the background, but his nervous glances and fidgeting movements gave him away. Samuel observed closely, noting every reaction, every hesitation. The chief remained calm, as if he knew that the truth would emerge if someone acted with courage and honesty. Samuel felt a surge of determination. He realized that he could not wait any longer. It was time to take a bold step to prevent a grave injustice. With careful planning, Samuel began speaking more assertively, pointing out contradictions in the witnesses' statements and emphasizing evidence that supported the chief's innocence. He did so cautiously, aware of the risks, but determined to act. The crowd began to react, some nodding in understanding, others whispering encouragement. The atmosphere in the square shifted from fear to tense anticipation. Everyone could sense that the truth was on the verge of being revealed, and that the fate of the chief depended on Samuel's courage and careful observation. By late afternoon, the tension reached its peak. The officials were growing desperate, trying to maintain control over the narrative. But their attempts were increasingly ineffective. Samuel continued to translate with precision, making sure that every detail, every inconsistency, and every witness account was clearly communicated. He could see the real criminal becoming more nervous, avoiding eye contact, and struggling to maintain composure. The chief remained calm, his presence commanding respect and attention. Samuel knew that the moment to expose the truth was close at hand. Finally, Samuel decided to act decisively. He spoke clearly and firmly, drawing attention to the contradictions, the overlooked details, and the suspicious behavior of the real criminal. He translated the chief's observations, emphasizing the accuracy of his statements and the impossibility of the accusations against him. The crowd reacted with surprise and disbelief. Murmurs grew louder as villagers began connecting the dots themselves, realizing that the chief had been framed. The atmosphere shifted dramatically, from fear and tension to hope and determination. The real criminal, realizing that their deception was about to be exposed, tried to intervene, but it was too late. Samuel, with calm confidence, continued to translate and clarify, ensuring that the truth could not be ignored. The villagers began speaking up, supporting Samuel's observations and confirming the chief's innocence. The authorities, faced with mounting evidence and the collective recognition of the truth by the crowd, were forced to reconsider their position. The chief, though still chained, remained composed, his calm confidence inspiring those around him. By evening, it was clear that the tide had turned. The chief's innocence was no longer in doubt for those paying close attention. Samuel's courage and careful observation had revealed the truth, exposing the real criminal and preventing a grave injustice. The villagers, inspired by the bravery of the young translator, began to celebrate quietly, relieved that justice had been served, at least for now. The chief, still dignified and calm, acknowledged Samuel with a subtle nod, a silent expression of gratitude and respect. As night fell over the settlement, Samuel reflected on the day's events. He had faced fear, risk, and uncertainty. Yet he had acted with courage and integrity. The chief, who had trusted him and inspired him, was safe. And the truth had been revealed. Samuel knew that this was a turning point, not just for the chief, but for the village as a whole. The power of honesty, careful observation, and moral courage had triumphed over fear, falsehood, and manipulation. The story of the third day would be remembered by the villagers for years to come. A day when an innocent chief faced execution, when fear and injustice threatened to dominate, and when a single courageous translator risked everything to ensure that truth prevailed. The lesson was clear. Even in the darkest moments, careful attention, bravery, and integrity could protect the innocent and bring justice where it seemed impossible. The sun rose slowly over the village, casting warm light on the central square, where the events of the past 3 days had changed the lives of everyone present. A sense of tension still lingered, but it was mixed with hope. Villagers moved cautiously, whispering among themselves, as if testing whether the calm that had settled over the square was real. The chief remained chained on the raised platform, but his expression was calm, dignified, and resolute. He had endured accusations, fear, and uncertainty. Yet his composure never faltered. Samuel, the young translator, stood nearby, alert and determined, aware that the final moments of this ordeal would be the most critical. The authorities gathered, their impatience obvious, but their confidence shaken. The inconsistencies that Samuel had carefully exposed over the previous day could no longer be ignored. The witnesses, who had been nervous and hesitant, now began to speak more openly. Some admitted to mistakes in their initial accounts, while others revealed new details that pointed clearly away from the chief. Samuel translated each statement with precision, ensuring that every word conveyed the truth exactly as it had been told. The tension in the square was almost unbearable. Everyone could feel that a moment of reckoning was near. The chief observed quietly, his eyes scanning the crowd, noticing the reactions of each villager, each witness, and each official. He did not speak unnecessarily, but every glance and gesture conveyed a calm authority. Samuel understood that the chief's presence itself was a powerful reminder of the truth. He felt inspired by the chief's courage, knowing that the man before him had faced countless challenges with the same quiet strength. Samuel realized that he had to act carefully, yet decisively, to ensure that the innocent man would finally be recognized as such. Suddenly, a key witness stepped forward. This was a villager who had previously been too afraid to speak. With Samuel's careful encouragement, the witness described the events of the night of the attack in detail. His account was clear and consistent, unlike the confused and contradictory statements given before. Samuel translated every word, emphasizing the key points. The chief had been far from the scene. The real perpetrator had been acting suspiciously, and multiple villagers had observed him in the area. As the truth unfolded, the villagers began to murmur among themselves, some nodding in recognition, others pointing out additional details they had noticed but had not dared to share. The authorities tried to interrupt, attempting to dismiss the witness's account. But Samuel's calm and precise translation left no room for misinterpretation. He highlighted every contradiction and inconsistency, showing how the chief's statements aligned perfectly with reality, while the official narrative was full of errors and assumptions. The crowd grew louder, voices rising in agreement, and the pressure on the officials increased. They could no longer rely on fear or authority alone to maintain control. The truth was becoming undeniable. Samuel's observations extended beyond words. He noted the nervous behavior of the real criminal, who had been hiding in the crowd. The man fidgeted, avoided eye contact, and tried to blend in. but subtle gestures betrayed his guilt. Samuel described these actions carefully to the authorities and the villagers, ensuring that everyone understood what they were seeing. The chief, though restrained by chains, subtly acknowledged Samuel's efforts with a small, approving nod. It was clear that the chief had trusted Samuel to act, and Samuel's confidence grew. He knew that this was the moment to ensure justice. As the day wore on, the villagers began to speak up more boldly. Encouraged by Samuel's translations and the chief's unwavering calm, they confirmed key details that exposed the false accusations. The real criminal's story started to crumble under scrutiny. Each statement, each observation, each tiny piece of evidence brought the truth closer to light. The tension in the square was intense. Everyone knew that the fate of the chief rested on these final moments. The chief, despite being chained, continued to exhibit quiet dignity. His presence inspired the villagers, giving them courage to speak openly and truthfully. Samuel translated every statement, every hesitation, every observation, ensuring that no detail was overlooked. The authorities, faced with mounting evidence and public pressure, began to realize that their initial assumption had been wrong. The chief, the man they had labeled a criminal, was innocent. The real perpetrator had been hiding in plain sight, taking advantage of fear and misunderstanding to commit a crime and avoid punishment. Finally, Samuel addressed the officials directly. He spoke calmly but firmly, presenting the facts clearly and logically. He highlighted the inconsistencies in the witnesses' earlier statements, the verified observations of the villagers, and the behavior of the real criminal. Samuel explained how the chief's actions, timeline, and presence had been documented and confirmed by multiple sources. He made it clear that the evidence overwhelmingly pointed to the chief's innocence and the real culprit's guilt. The crowd listened attentively, their whispers growing into agreement, and then into clear, vocal support for the truth. The authorities hesitated, caught between their previous assumptions and the undeniable evidence presented by Samuel and the villagers. The chief remained calm, observing without a word, his dignity and composure a silent argument for justice. Samuel could see that the moment had come to act decisively. He emphasized the accuracy of the chief's statements, the courage of the villagers, and the inconsistencies in the false narrative. The crowd, now fully engaged, supported Samuel's words with nods, gestures, and murmurs of agreement. The real criminal, realizing that exposure was inevitable, attempted to flee but was quickly restrained by alert villagers. His nervous demeanor and attempted escape confirmed his guilt beyond doubt. Samuel translated the reactions and statements of the villagers, ensuring that the authorities understood the situation. The chief remained composed, his calm demeanor helping to restore order and prevent panic. The square, once tense with fear and uncertainty, now buzzed with relief and a growing sense of justice. With the truth finally clear, the authorities had no choice but to acknowledge the chief's innocence. Chains were removed, and the chief stood tall, his presence commanding respect and admiration. Villagers cheered quietly at first, then more openly, celebrating the end of a tense ordeal and the triumph of truth and justice. Samuel, though exhausted, felt a profound sense of accomplishment. He had risked his safety, carefully observed every detail, and used his position to ensure that an innocent man would not be condemned. The chief, now free, acknowledged Samuel with a warm smile, a gesture filled with gratitude and respect. The village slowly returned to normal, though the events of the past days would never be forgotten. The chief resumed his role as a leader and protector, now even more respected for his courage, patience, and integrity. Samuel's actions became a symbol of moral courage, showing that one person, willing to act honestly and with determination, could make a significant difference. The villagers shared stories of the ordeal, teaching younger generations the importance of observation, truth, and bravery. In the quiet that followed the ordeal, the chief spoke to Samuel privately. He expressed his deep gratitude for the young translator's courage, wisdom, and careful attention to detail. The chief reminded Samuel that justice often requires vigilance and the willingness to act, even when danger is present. Samuel, in turn, felt honored to have played a part in protecting someone he admired and respected. Their bond, forged through trust and courage, became a lasting symbol of integrity and dedication. The story of the chief's near execution and the brave translator spread beyond the village. It became an example of the power of truth, careful observation, and moral courage. People learned that fear and assumptions could lead to injustice, but that honesty, persistence, and careful attention could restore fairness and protect the innocent. The chief continued his life with renewed respect from his people, and Samuel remained a trusted figure, recognized for his bravery and wisdom. Even years later, villagers would recount the events of those tense days with a mix of awe and admiration. They remembered the fear, the uncertainty, and the courage that had prevailed. The chief, once chained and accused, became a symbol of justice and patience, while Samuel, the translator who had risked everything, became a reminder that even the smallest voice, if spoken with honesty and courage, could change the course of events. The ordeal had tested everyone, but it had also shown the enduring power of truth and the importance of standing up for what is right, no matter the cost. As the sun set over the village, casting golden light over the central square, the chief and Samuel stood together, observing the people they had served and protected. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that justice had been done, that the innocent had been saved, and that the village had witnessed the triumph of truth over fear and falsehood. The experience left a lasting impression on everyone involved, shaping the values and character of the community for generations to come. The village had been changed forever, not just by the events themselves, but by the courage, honesty, and determination of those who refused to remain silent in the face of injustice. The chief continued to lead with wisdom and compassion, and Samuel's actions inspired countless others to act with integrity and courage. The story, passed down through generations, became a timeless reminder that truth, observation, and bravery could overcome even the most difficult challenges, and that justice, though sometimes delayed, would ultimately prevail.